Elliot Raymond hadn't been back to Elmsworth in over a decade, but the first thing to greet him wasn't a pie or a hug. It was a $250 citation taped to his mother's door. The crisp morning air tugged at the hem of his coat as he stood on the front porch of the little cedar house where he'd spent most of his childhood summers. A few gold and russet leaves floated across the steps, catching against his worn suitcase. He held the thin yellow paper in both hands like it might dissolve if gripped too tightly, rereading the offense, violation of HOA Aesthetic Ordinance 7C, unauthorized display of professional symbolism. He blinked, uncertain if the autumn light was playing tricks. Margaret had mentioned the neighborhood had gotten more organized since he'd left, but this was absurd. Inside, Margaret Raymond sat in her favorite recliner, one ankle bandaged and propped on a pillow, the ever-present wool cardigan draped across her shoulders. Pinned near her collar was a silver badge, slightly dulled with age but unmistakable, Dr. Margaret Raymond, Elmsworth General, Emergency Services. She noticed the paper in his hand before he spoke. "Oh, that?" she said calmly. "Karen stopped by yesterday while I was icing my ankle. She said it disrupts the visual peace of the neighborhood." Elliot dropped his bag and moved closer. "Your hospital badge? That's what this is about?" Margaret folded the edge of her newspaper, then glanced toward the kitchen, where a timer dinged faintly. "Apparently, I'm a visual disturbance now." 15 minutes later, they were seated at Maple and Mug, the old diner near Main and Birch. Jeanette, the owner, greeted them with her usual grin and 2 mugs of coffee, 2 creams, no sugar for Elliot, the way she remembered. "Kiddo," she chirped, placing the mugs down, "you've got more gray in that hair than your mama now." Elliot smiled weakly. "It's stress. And poor city coffee. Try the pancakes. Pumpkin pecan. Seasonal cure for municipal nonsense." She winked and disappeared into the kitchen. The diner buzzed with quiet energy. Locals in flannel jackets murmured over their plates, the scent of cinnamon and maple butter heavy in the air. Margaret flipped through her planner, still using the same soft leather-bound book she'd carried since retirement. "Remember the fall health fair at the church?" she asked, eyes scanning the ink-dense pages. Karen was there, set up next to the flu shot station. She had pamphlets about visual uniformity for neighborhood wellness. "I thought it was some odd yoga outreach." Elliot shook his head. "So she's always been like this?" "She's gotten worse since being elected HOA president last spring. Uniform mailbox heights. No wind chimes. And apparently," Margaret tapped the badge on her chest, "no visible reminders of one's previous life." The pancakes arrived, thick and warm, filling the air with spiced sweetness. They ate mostly in silence, save for Elliot's occasional mutterings about legal definitions of symbolism. Jeanette refilled their mugs without asking, slipping a small slice of pie onto their bill as emergency therapy. Back at the house, the sunlight slanted through the front window, falling across a bookshelf lined with medical texts and photo albums. Elliot reached for a folded piece of mail on the entry table, thin cardstock printed with soft floral patterns and the HOA seal embossed in gold. He opened it. "Ms. Raymond and resident," he read aloud. "You are cordially invited to attend the upcoming HOA Ordinance Review meeting to discuss recent neighborhood violations and clarify aesthetic expectations moving forward." Margaret looked up from the worn ledger in her lap, still filled with handwritten names and vitals from decades past. "It's not worth a fight," she said, softly. But Elliot held the citation up again, letting the late afternoon light pass through its translucent edge. "Doctor's badge violates visual harmony standards," he repeated, each word falling slower than the last. Margaret's mouth pulled into a line, unreadable. On the porch outside, a single orange leaf stuck to the corner of the screen door as the wind died down. Karen didn't need a megaphone, her PowerPoint clicker and diffused eucalyptus oil did all the commanding. The basement of Elmsworth Baptist Church smelled like every church basement across rural Virginia, bleach and baked goods, with a new undertone tonight, something sharply herbal drifting from a plug-in diffuser humming near the podium. Elliot shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair, his knees brushing the edge of a donated card table. Beside him, Margaret sat composed as ever, her cardigan neatly buttoned over her dress and her doctor's badge prominently pinned. A projector screen flickered to life as Karen Carmichael stepped forward. She wore a blush-pink pantsuit, perfectly matched to her lipstick, and held a sleek remote in one hand like a conductor's baton. Her travel mug read "Control is calm," the phrase stenciled in soft gray script. She clicked once, and a watercolor image of tulips filled the screen under the title, "Visual Harmony, the Next Chapter in Community Wellness." Karen began in a tone better suited to yoga retreats than neighborhood disputes. When we align our external environment, we promote peace within. Tonight, I invite each of you to envision a community where nothing distracts from unity. Elliot leaned slightly toward Margaret. Last year she banned lawn flamingos. This year, badges. Margaret murmured, next year, it'll be window blinds that disrupt chi. Karen continued, clicking through slides that ranged from pastel color palettes to blurry stock photos of smiling seniors drinking tea. As she spoke, she gestured gracefully with one hand and breathed with theatrical control. We must recognize that even well-meaning symbols can fracture our aesthetic equilibrium. Take, for example, an item that might evoke stress or outdated hierarchies, a medical badge. A few murmurs stirred among the dozen or so residents scattered throughout the room. Mr. Dorsey, long retired from the postal service and known for his devotion to rules, squinted at the screen. Lila Monroe, the mayor's assistant, sat in the back row, legal pad in hand, her expression unreadable. Karen turned deliberately toward Margaret without naming her. While we deeply respect all forms of service, maintaining visual coherence is essential. Inconsistent displays, even of professional history, can erode the calm we work so hard to maintain. Elliot raised his hand. Karen hesitated before nodding politely. Yes. Mr. Raymond? He stood, his voice even but resonant in the low-ceilinged space. I'm curious, has anyone here ever been saved by consistent visual coherence? A few stifled chuckles. One woman behind him coughed into her sleeve. Karen's smile tightened. I understand your concern, she replied, but our policy isn't about discrediting professions. It's about preventing discordant imagery from unsettling the communal flow. You mean like badges? Karen blinked slowly. We're speaking broadly. Mr. Dorsey leaned forward. Broadly or not, this sounds personal. Lila glanced up from her notes, making brief eye contact with Elliot. Her pen paused. Karen lifted her chin, undeterred. Which brings me to a constructive proposal. She clicked, and a new slide appeared titled, Community Display Authorization Form, Draft. Moving forward, she declared, any symbol, badge, or professional emblem displayed in shared visibility, whether in windows, on porches, or clothing, should be registered with our new Aesthetic Review Subcommittee for approval. There was a short silence. Elliot remained standing. That's not policy, he said slowly. That's censorship with soft edges. Karen's smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened on the clicker. We'll vote on the draft at the next meeting. Tonight is just education. Margaret looked down at her badge, fingers brushing its worn edges. Her jaw remained tight but still. She didn't speak, but Elliot saw something shift behind her eyes. Karen clapped once, breaking the tension. Let's enjoy refreshments, shall we? The lights came up fully. Someone wheeled out a cart of sugar cookies and lukewarm coffee in foam cups. The eucalyptus scent grew stronger, almost medicinal now. Mr. Dorsey wandered over to Margaret and Elliot, balancing a cookie on a napkin. I didn't like her tone, he muttered. But rules are rules. Elliot shrugged. Sometimes rules are just opinion with paperwork. As residents filtered toward the snack table, Lila passed them quietly, her expression thoughtful. That was an interesting point you made, she said softly to Elliot before moving on. Outside, the October wind picked up, rustling the trees that lined the street. The moon hung low over the red brick church. Elliot turned to his mother. We're not in Kansas anymore, are we? Margaret responded without missing a beat, no, but I liked Kansas better. Some battles are fought with fists, others with footnotes. The elevator at Elmsworth General hadn't changed in 10 years. Same flickering overhead light, same hum, same laminated notice about flu shots taped crookedly beside the floor buttons. Elliot stood inside, hands in the pockets of his jacket, watching the numbers blink slowly upward. He wasn't nervous exactly, more alert, the way he used to feel before walking into a department budget meeting where he already suspected someone had misfiled the numbers. The doors opened to the administrative wing. Familiar linoleum, a faint scent of sanitizer, and, somewhere down the hall, the sound of Nurse Ellie laughing like she always had when someone mentioned donuts before noon. He turned left, following muscle memory to the third door, Legal Affairs. Miss Chen was precisely as he remembered, hair clipped back, sharp glasses, sharper voice. She looked up from her monitor with the same efficiency she used when someone tried to skip a form. "Mr. Raymond," she said. "You're either lost or curious. Which is it?" "Curious," Elliot replied with a smile. "And possibly a little annoyed." She motioned for him to sit. "Proceed." He laid a copy of the HOA citation on her desk. She scanned it, then set it aside. "I'm not familiar with Elmsworth HOA's guidelines, but you're not here about municipal law, are you?" "No," he hesitated, then leaned forward. "I'm here about how HOAs apply for group insurance plans." She raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "About 10 years ago, I was still working here, coordinating clinical operations. There was a case in another town. HOA used a local nurse's volunteer title to qualify for public health partnership discounts. It stuck with me." He paused. "My mother's name was recently referenced by the Elmsworth HOA in a way that didn't sit right." Chen folded her hands. "You think they used her credentials?" "She was listed, possibly without consent, as a community volunteer physician. Then fined for wearing her badge." "That's bold," Chen murmured, opening a file on her computer. "Do you have documentation?" "Not yet," Elliot admitted. "But I plan to." She didn't smile, but her eyes narrowed with interest. "If what you're saying is true, that's insurance fraud." Back at home, the late afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting warm lines across the old checkered linoleum floor. Margaret stood by the table, sorting through a dusty biscuit tin full of assorted papers, her reading glasses slipping down her nose. "You really think they'd do that?" she asked. Elliot pulled a chair beside her. "They already did. Now we just need to prove it." She lifted out a folded packet, thin, brittle, printed on letterhead from nearly a decade ago. The header read, "Application for Group Coverage, Elmsworth Homeowners Association." She turned to the last page, where her signature rested quietly above the line, "Community Wellness Representative." "I remember this," she said softly. "Karen brought it over and said it was just a backup plan for local safety. I didn't read the fine print." "That's how they got the discount," Elliot said, running his finger down the list of named volunteers. "And now they're pretending your credentials are disruptive." He sat back, heart pounding, not from anger this time, but from the clarity of the pattern. They'd used her name for financial gain. Then turned around and punished her for displaying the same role that had made that possible. So, they used her credentials to get cheaper coverage. Now they fine her for showing the badge that made it possible? Margaret said nothing for a moment. Then she reached for her mug of tea, lukewarm now, and took a sip. People who talk about harmony tend to like control more than balance. Elliot opened his laptop. The cursor blinked in the empty message field for a few seconds before he began typing. The HOA had used Margaret's credentials to get a discount, but they didn't expect anyone to read the fine print. Elliot stood under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the hospital's records annex, holding a crisp manila envelope. The room smelled like aging paper and ozone, and the archivist had handed him the document with a faint warning, "You didn't get this from me." Inside, neatly photocopied and dated just 8 months ago, was the insurance renewal packet filed by the Elmsworth HOA. Page 3 bore the typed name, Dr. Margaret A. Raymond, Volunteer Community Physician, directly under the section marked Eligibility for Group Rate Adjustment. It wasn't even buried. Just bolded, stamped, and sitting in plain sight. He scanned the page again, jaw tight. There it was, HOA President Karen Carmichael's signature, dated and certified. Margaret sat quietly across from him in her kitchen later that day, a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. Elliot had spread the forms across the table, hospital contracts, HOA bylaws, and a hand-scrawled list of next steps on a diner napkin. "I may not be practicing anymore," she murmured, "but I never signed away my name." "No," Elliot replied. "They just used it. And now it's going to bite them." He tapped at his laptop as he spoke. On screen, Miss Chen's draft letter to the insurance providers scrolled downward, precise and damning in tone. It cited fraud, misrepresentation of covered parties, and potential voiding of community liability policies. A second letter addressed to the HOA cited improper use of credentials without the consent of the named party. "She doesn't know what she started," Margaret said, voice low. "She picked this fight," Elliot said, sealing the envelope. 2 days later, the doorbell rang just after dusk. Elliot found an unmarked manila envelope sitting in their mailbox. No note. Just a neatly typed copy of the HOA's original insurance submission, identical to the one he'd requested, but with marginal notes in blue ink. A sticky note in the corner simply read, "She knew." G. Elliot recognized the initial. Glenn, one of the HOA assistants. Soft-spoken, polite, often tasked with setting up chairs and distributing flyers at community events. He'd always seemed uneasy during Karen's presentations, now Elliot understood why. Later that night, with Margaret sitting beside him, he opened an old cassette recorder that had been gathering dust in a corner cabinet. The tape inside clicked into motion, and a voice echoed softly into the kitchen. "We try to make time for everyone, no matter the severity. You listen first. That's the job. Sometimes just listening makes the difference." It was Margaret's voice, from a 1995 local radio interview, when she'd been honored for her community work. She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as if hearing her younger self stirred something familiar. Elliot stood and moved toward the small bookshelf in the corner, pulled down a simple wooden frame, and opened it. He slid her hospital badge into the frame, closed it gently, and set it upright beside the tape player. "Time to stop hiding the part that matters," he said. Margaret nodded, her eyes still distant. Then he opened a new email. To compliance@primeshieldinsurance.org. Subject, Official Violation Report, HOA Elmsworth. He attached the documents, the scanned signatures, and the blue-marked copy from Glenn. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in slow circles. Inside, a warm lamp cast gold across the papers still resting on the kitchen table. The next morning, as Karen sorted through her HOA correspondence, arranged as always in a decorative basket matching her curtains, she spotted a stark white envelope with the insurance company's seal. She opened it. Coverage suspended pending internal review. Karen announced a Wellness and Community Image Forum. Elliot called it a Cover Your Tracks meeting. The community hall hadn't changed much since Elliot was a teenager, same wood-paneled walls, same squeaky folding chairs, and the same bulletin board by the door, now adorned with hand-lettered signs reading, "Bring your best questions." Beneath it, someone had pinned a flyer for tonight's event, complete with a soft watercolor background and a line of scripted text that read, "Wellness begins with unity." Karen stood near the front, a pastel slideshow flickering behind her. She wore a seafoam blazer that matched the PowerPoint's title card and a practiced smile. The diffuser near the podium hummed softly, releasing something vaguely citrus and medicinal. "Thank you all for coming," she began, clicking to the next slide. "Wellness isn't just about health. It's about harmony. And harmony, dear neighbors, starts with consistency, in design, in tone, and yes, in presentation." Elliot exchanged a glance with Margaret, who sat stiffly near the aisle, hands folded around a paper cup of cider. Nearby, someone had arranged trays of homemade cookies and slices of pecan pie. One of the sugar cookies bore the HOA emblem, defaced with a hastily drawn handlebar mustache. Margaret leaned in. "Last time she held a forum, we lost wind chimes and gained beige-only mailboxes." Karen's voice filled the space again, soft and confident. "Tonight, I invite you not to dwell on conflict, but to envision clarity. Elliot stood. Karen paused mid-slide. "Yes, Mr. Raymond?" He stepped forward, a file folder in hand. "If I may, I'd like 5 minutes." Karen's hesitation was almost imperceptible. "5 minutes," she said. "As a courtesy." He opened the folder and set several stapled packets on the front table. "What you're holding are copies of the HOA's insurance applications from the last 2 years, documents signed and submitted on behalf of the community." Several attendees picked up the papers, murmuring as they flipped through pages. On page 3, Elliot continued, "You'll find a listing, Dr. Margaret A. Raymond, volunteer community physician." That title helped secure group rate reductions. That same name is now being fined for displaying a badge that proves the title existed in the first place. A ripple moved through the room. Someone dropped their cookie. Karen took a step forward. "Mr. Raymond, this isn't the appropriate." Elliot raised his voice, calm but firm. This forum was framed as a place to discuss image and wellness. What's more on topic than misusing a neighbor's professional identity for financial gain? From the back, a voice spoke up, clear and steady. "She saved my father at church once," Nurse Ellie said, stepping into view. "During a stroke. If she hadn't been wearing that badge, I might not have known to call for her. How dare you shame her for it?" The room quieted. Karen's jaw tightened, her smile forced now. "I think we're losing perspective," she tried. "It's not about one person. It's about maintaining a collective visual tone." Lila Monroe stood next, holding a slim folio marked with the town's seal. "On behalf of the mayor's office, I'd like to announce an official review of the HOA's recent budget activities, including insurance filings and community fines." Applause broke out, not loud, but steady and growing. Mr. Dorsey clapped slowly. Margaret looked down at her cup, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Karen's hand hovered over the clicker, forgotten. Her pastel slides continued flicking silently behind her, unity, grace, tranquility, each one landing like a missed cue. At the snack table, someone added a second mustache to another cookie. Near the front, a folded sheet of paper passed from hand to hand. 34 signatures, neatly inked, with a bold header across the top. "Motion to vote on leadership confidence." He copied the citation, attached the document from the biscuit tin, and added a summary of the situation. Before clicking send, he looked again at his mother's name, neatly printed in the scanned form. When he hit send, it felt less like an email and more like striking the first chord of something long overdue. Karen believed in control. She just forgot who'd written the rules she used. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of cinnamon and drying leaves. String lights glowed softly above the town park's old wooden gazebo, casting gentle halos on the gathered crowd. Folding chairs clicked open across the grass, and knit blankets were tucked around knees. Someone passed around thermoses of cider and a plate of gingerbread cookies wrapped in wax paper. Elliot stood near the front, a folder under his arm, his breath visible in the chill. Margaret sat quietly beside Mr. Dorsey, wrapped in her old forest green shawl, listening as the small crowd murmured with anticipation. Glenn hovered near the edge of the gazebo steps, face pale but composed. Karen arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, as announced. She wore gray this time, an elegant wool coat with a pearl clasp at the collar, and carried no slideshow, no mug, no clicker. Only a small notebook pressed tightly in her hand. This meeting, Elliot began, was called under Article 3, Section 9, Subclause B, the Sunset Clause. A few heads turned. Most residents were unfamiliar with the finer points of HOA procedure. But Lila Monroe, standing just off to the side in a burgundy scarf and gloves, nodded in recognition. "It states," Elliot continued, flipping open the folder, "that should 75% of active community members vote to revoke confidence in HOA leadership, due to financial misconduct, ethical breaches, or failure to disclose conflicts of interest, that leadership must step down effective immediately." Karen took a step forward. "This is an ambush," she said, voice tight. "No," Lila replied gently. "It's a vote. You signed the bylaw revisions yourself in 2017. Karen's mouth opened and closed once. Then she turned, scanning the crowd. I've given this community structure, order, and bills, someone muttered. Karen pressed on. I know people are confused, misinformed. This campaign against me. A speaker crackled to life beside the gazebo. Glenn, without looking up, pressed play. Karen's voice echoed over the crowd, unmistakable. Convince them this is just budget reshuffling. If Mrs. Raymond gets stubborn, remind her she benefited from this arrangement for years. Do it, Glenn. A quiet inhalation spread through the audience like wind. When the recording ended, Glenn stepped forward. She asked me to alter line items in the annual expense report, he said. I did it. I regret it. Margaret looked down at her gloved hands. Elliot didn't move. Karen's face was unreadable, but the silence pressed in around her like fog. Then Mr. Dorsey stood. Let's vote. A folding table was wheeled out. Sheets were distributed. People lined up in coats and scarves, holding pens and mugs. Some brought dogs. Some brought apple muffins to share. They marked their ballots one by one. Lila counted aloud as she read each slip under the gazebo lights. Yes, yes, yes. When the last ballot was tallied, she looked up. 81% in favor. No one cheered. No one clapped. Karen stood alone near the edge of the grass, the string lights casting long, pale shadows behind her. She didn't speak, didn't make a final speech. Just turned slowly, notebook still clutched in her hand, and walked down the path, past the benches and the carved wooden welcome sign. Elliot watched her go. The hush of the crowd remained unbroken. She finally matched her aesthetic, he said softly, almost to himself. Neutral and silent. The HOA sign outside Karen's house was gone by sunrise, and so was she. A thin layer of frost dusted the sidewalks that Sunday morning, shimmering faintly under the glow of porch lights and the first strands of Christmas bulbs being hung across Elmsworth. The small vinyl plaque reading HOA President, K. Carmichael, had vanished from the corner of her lawn. By the time Margaret opened her curtains, a moving truck was already gone, and the house sat quiet and bare, its windows hollow like unsent letters. Margaret watched the empty porch from her armchair, a ball of navy yarn resting in her lap. The scarf she was knitting grew slowly, each stitch careful and even. Outside, someone hammered stakes into their lawn for a light-up snowman. Across the street, Mr. Dorsey took his morning walk, thermos in hand. Peaceful, she murmured. Later that day, the new HOA board met under temporary arrangements in the back of the library. Folding chairs again, but this time without the pressure. Lila stood at the head of the table, reading from a freshly typed draft. In recognition of community contributions, and in acknowledgement of recent events, we propose a new guideline: no future leadership decision shall override or diminish the visible representation of service, medical or otherwise. Elliot nodded from his seat near the window, glancing occasionally at the community members gathered around. Mrs. Langley had brought muffins. Glenn, now quiet but steady, sat near the edge of the circle, eyes focused and alert. The motion passed without a single dissent. We also unanimously nominate Dr. Margaret Raymond as honorary advisor for public health, Lila added. Symbolic, but meaningful. Margaret, seated beside Jeanette, shook her head with a small smile. As long as I don't have to run the meetings. You've earned the right to just show up and be thanked, Elliot whispered. Lila pulled out a slim envelope. And this is for you, she said, handing it to him. From Prime Shield Insurance. Inside was a short letter, direct and to the point. Due to ethical violations discovered in the prior administration's application, we will not be renewing HOA Elmsworth's policy. No further action will be taken, and the matter is considered closed. At the bottom was a handwritten note: thank you for bringing this to our attention. That afternoon, Margaret hosted tea on her porch. She'd invited half the street, and most showed up with cookies, bundt cakes, or jars of homemade preserves. Jeanette brought her signature pecan pie with a label tucked under the crust, Dr. M's favorite. I didn't authorize that, Margaret teased as she served warm cider. I took creative liberty, Jeanette replied. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the rooftops, the chatter softened into a comfortable hum. Laughter echoed down the block again, not sharp or forced but easy, restored. The winter fair arrived a week later. Booths lined Main Street, strung with tinsel and ornaments. Children ran in knitted hats, tugging their parents toward hot cocoa and handmade mittens. Near the gazebo, beneath a garland-wrapped banner, a small ceremony took place. Margaret stood in front of a crowd as Lila handed her a framed plaque, Elmsworth Legacy Caregiver. Next to it, under glass, was a faded photo of Margaret in scrubs, mid-laugh beside a row of nurses, and beside that, her silver doctor's badge, mounted with care. The applause was warm, not loud. Margaret bowed her head gently, touched by the honor but not needing the attention. She glanced toward Elliot, who stood at the edge of the crowd, smiling. As cameras flashed, a young reporter approached him. "Mr. Raymond," she asked, pen poised. "Would you ever consider running for HOA president next year? Some symbols earn respect, not because of power, but because of the lives they've touched." The new HOA meeting room still smelled faintly of fresh paint and pine cleaner, but the mood was different now, less tense, more lived in. At the front of the room, just beneath the mounted flag and a framed map of Elmsworth, hung something new. Centered and backlit by soft wall sconces, Margaret's doctor's badge rested inside a simple wooden frame, the metal polished, the engraving still sharp despite the years. It hadn't been hung there by demand, only by consensus. No vote was needed when meaning was so universally understood. The plaque beneath read, "For service rendered without expectation, only care." At Margaret's house, the mail that morning brought an envelope with slanted handwriting and no return address. Inside was a lined sheet from a high school notebook, folded twice. "Dear Dr. Raymond. You probably don't remember me. I was the kid who passed out at the bus stop in the 7th grade. It turned out to be asthma, but you were the one who caught it before anyone else did. My mom said if you hadn't been there, things could have gone badly. Anyway, I'm in college now. Studying nursing. Just wanted you to know that you made a difference. Thanks for not throwing that badge away. Ben R." Margaret read the letter twice before passing it to Elliot, her fingers lingering for a moment on the paper. At Maple and Mug, Jeanette poured 2 cups of a new blend, light, smooth, with a hint of cinnamon. The sign near the register read, "Margaret's Blend, kindness in every cup." Elliot chuckled when he saw it. "She let you name a roast after her?" he asked. "Had to trade 2 pies and a promise not to put her face on the label," Jeanette replied. "Still worth it." The potluck that evening filled the community hall with the scent of casseroles, spiced cider, and sugar-dusted pies. Children ran between folding chairs, and old records played softly from the speakers tucked near the windows. Someone brought a crock-pot of chili. Someone else brought a tray of roasted carrots labeled from the Langley garden. Toward the end of the evening, Margaret stood slowly, a soft hush falling over the room. She held a small note card, but didn't glance at it once as she spoke. "We protect what matters, not through force, but through memory and decency. And I think this year reminded all of us how valuable that is." She paused, then smiled gently. "So thank you, for remembering." Applause rose, not loud but warm, and stayed just long enough to settle in the walls. Lila leaned over to Elliot afterward, sipping her cider. "If you don't run for HOA president next year," she said, "I'm putting your name on the ballot anyway. In glitter pen." "I'd sue for defamation," he said, smiling. "You'd lose. Voters love glitter." Back at home, Elliot unpacked the last of the boxes he'd left untouched since returning. The decision had been made quietly: he'd take on remote consulting work, stay in Elmsworth for good. It didn't need fanfare. As the house quieted, he walked into the small study off the kitchen and hung a new photo on the wall. Margaret, wearing her gray coat, stood in the winter light with her badge gleaming from her lapel. Just beneath the image, he'd had a small brass plate engraved. Honor doesn't expire. And neither should gratitude. Outside, the church bells chimed 8:30. The wind rustled the last few leaves across the porch. And in the quiet warmth of their home, the story found its rest, not with noise, but with memory. When the frost finally settled over Elmsworth, the town seemed quieter, not from silence, but from a peace long overdue. The badge once dismissed as a disruption now stood framed between the flag and the map, not as a relic, but as a reminder of what care and truth can build. This wasn't just a story about bylaws or meetings, it was about remembering that rules should protect, not punish, that power without decency is just noise waiting to be quieted. Like a porch light left on through the night, one honest life can keep a whole neighborhood from losing its way.